Morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? All right, excellent. So, my name is Gracie. I am from Buffalo, New York. This is my first time at BSides San Antonio. It's always this warm here, right? Because it was snowing back home like a month ago. But all right, so we'll start with who I am and what I'm talking about. So, as he said, my name is Gracie. I have a lot of jobs. I organize the BSides conference in Buffalo. I organize a lot of other community events that's there. I am an adjunct professor in the graduate program in cybersecurity at Canisius University in Buffalo. Canisius is one of the 26 Jesuit colleges and universities that are not Georgetown or Boston College. My main day job is I work for a company called Security Onion Solutions. Who's heard of Security Onion? All right, fair number of people. So Security Onion is the tool that I'm going to be talking about today as sort of the focus of these detection engineering lessons. I want to make clear at this point, I work for Security Onion Solutions. I do professional support for the Security Onion platform, but this talk is in no way a sales pitch, nothing that I'm going to show you costs any money. You can get our software for free from our GitHub. We don't even want your email address. You can play around with it however you like, okay? Free and open platform, totally up to you. You can do whatever you want with it, okay? I know there's always some confusion, so I just wanted to say that up front. Before I worked for Security Onion, I was a blue teamer for about 15 years. I worked in a lot of different industries. So this is some lessons that I learned about tuning tools and doing detection engineering over those years. This is not intended to be a super in-depth technical talk on the Security Onion platform. If you have questions about it, if you've deployed it and couldn't get something to work, flag me down afterwards. I'm always happy to talk about that stuff. This is more of a high-level capabilities. How do we turn threat intelligence and indicators of compromise and stuff that we're looking for into rules so that we know about it when evil rears its head in our network? So first things first, what is cyber threat intelligence? I have a couple of slides like this with definitions that come at it from different angles. So according to CrowdStrike, threat intelligence refers to the collection, processing, and analysis of data to understand a threat actor's motives, targets, and attack methods, right? This is more of the how do I produce threat intelligence side of things. How do I take raw data or raw IOCs or raw log files and turn them into something actionable, turn them into intelligence that is useful to me as an analyst or as an investigator, right? From the other side, I have this definition from Gartner, and this one's a little bit older. I think this paper was from 2013. And this kind of shows how the attitude toward threat intelligence has changed in our field in the last 10 years. Threat intelligence is evidence-based knowledge, including context, mechanisms, indicators, implications, and actionable advice about an existing or emerging menace or hazard to assets, right? So this is more of these are the bad things to look for, go look for them, as opposed to CrowdStrike's definition, which is more, here's a whole bunch of data, how do we turn that into something more consistent, right? Something more than just a scattering of IP addresses or a scattering of hash values, but rather actual intelligence about our adversaries, okay? I'd love to tell you more about the Gartner paper, but it's from 2013, as I said, and also $200. So I'm going to skip past this slide now. Where do we get threat intelligence? If you're in a huge enterprise, you might have your own threat intelligence team, right? I know one of my coworkers came from General Electric, right? General Electric, huge company, hundreds of thousands of employees. They had a whole threat intelligence division. Another good friend of mine runs the IT department for a community college in North Carolina. His entire IT department is one person. So, depending on your scale, you may have a lot of different options for where you can get this threat intelligence. The most basic place, and one that has come up in some of the other talks that I attended this morning, is threat intelligence that comes from vendors, right? Microsoft, for example, has a huge threat intelligence department. They publish a lot of it. This is from their Blue Sky account. The Verizon debug, I think, has been mentioned in every talk that I've been in this morning, right? That is a treasure trove of threat intelligence, information about what actors are actually doing and things that you want to look for. Companies like Huntress or CrowdStrike, I believe Unit 42 from Proofpoint puts out an annual report. There's a lot of these different vendor reports that are more or less applicable to you depending on your industry and depending on your infrastructure, but they're definitely worth a look. And most of them are freely available for values of freely available that include giving them your email address, okay? Another good source for threat intelligence, especially if you're just starting out or you're looking to stand up a purple team program or something like that, is the MITRE ATT&CK matrix, right? So as you know, MITRE ATT&CK is essentially a taxonomy of attacker techniques, right? How do the bad guys breach networks? What do they do once they're in there? How do they laterally move? How do they exfiltrate data? MITRE ATT&CK also includes adversary dossiers like this. This one's for Scattered Spider, currently running roughshod over Aflac and the rest of the insurance industry. MITRE publishes all of this data, comes from open sources, and they'll publish things like campaign summaries. What did the bad guys do? How did they get in? It's phishing or it's stolen credentials. What did they do once they were in? What artifacts can you look for? What sort of malicious software do they use? Are they using info stealers? Are they using C2 frameworks? If so, which ones, right? MITRE ATT&CK digests all these open sources down, they put it into this very convenient form, and they give you indicators to look for, right? And over the last, 5, 10 years that ATT&CK has been around, a lot of tooling has also been modified to incorporate these MITRE ATT&CK taxonomy codes. So the tactics and techniques you can look at throughout your defensive stack and see, okay, I have coverage for this, I have coverage for this, I have coverage for this. It's not perfect, but it gives you something. Depending upon your industry, you may be affiliated with an ISAC, right? ISACs are intelligence sharing and analysis centers. They're a public-private partnership, and they exist for a variety of different industry verticals. When I worked for an insurance company, we were a member of FS ISAC, the Financial Services ISAC. When I worked for a healthcare company, we were a member of HISAC, the Health ISAC. A lot of these ISACs have industry-specific threat intelligence that they share with members, right? Additionally, if you're part of a larger group inside that industry, you may have your own sort of little internal threat intelligence groups. I worked for a Blue Cross and Blue Shield provider for a while. We had an internal threat intelligence group that was sharing information among specifically Blue Cross and Blue Shield providers. There's a couple dozen of them in the US, right, ranging from giant ones like Anthem to Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Vermont, which I think also makes ice cream. And we all shared intelligence because we were all dealing with the same threats and the same threat actors, right? If you are part of a industry that has an ISAC and your employer is not a member of that ISAC, you should look into getting membership. It is probably the most cost-effective way to get good, verifiable, industry-specific threat intelligence. There are also community threat exchanges. This screenshot is from the old Alien Vault OTX, the Open Threat Exchange. It has a new name now, which is escaping me. I don't know if anybody knows it. But people will do things like run a honeypot in their Azure instance and then publish the IOCs, publish the IP addresses, publish the tooling of the groups that attack it, right? So you can subscribe to them, import this into your own tooling, into your threat intelligence platform of choice. And finally, there's always the option of rolling your own. So this outline, does anyone recognize this this diagram here? What? Oh, very good, very good.
But it used to be called Houdini.
Back in the day, yes. Yeah, so same guy. So the peak threat hunting framework is from Splunk. It's by Dave Bianco. This is their baseline threat hunting workflow, right? So if you establish a baseline of normal behavior in your network, in your environment, and then you investigate against that baseline looking for outliers, that's what this whole workflow is here. And you can see at the bottom, you investigate the outliers, you escalate your findings, you do your gap analysis, that is, where did my detections fail? Where did I not see these outliers? Why did I not get alerted to them? And then in the last column here, this is the analysis portion of peak, you create your detections, right? So when you're going out and doing a threat hunt in your environment, what are the outputs from that process? One of them should be threat intelligence, and then you can take that threat intelligence and turn it into new detections, right? Again, this is going to depend upon the scale of your enterprise, how much logging you're bringing in, how seriously you're threat hunting, but this is the best way to get stuff specific to you because it's data that was generated specifically by you. All right. A question for the class. Who recognizes this diagram? You already got it on you. Yes.
It's pyramid of pain.
The pyramid of pain, very good. This is another Dave Bianco. So I am going to owe Dave $2 the next time I see him because I stole 2 of his diagrams for this presentation. The idea behind the pyramid of pain is this is how we can sort of triage our threat intelligence, determine what is effective and for how long, right? And the way it's organized is the IOCs that are the easiest for the bad guys to change, the easiest for them to pivot away from and show something else are down at the bottom. Hash values, right? If I get a hash value for a piece of malicious software, how long is that going to be good for? A day, maybe 2, right? It's very easy for the bad guys to change. All they have to do is recompile it. All they have to do is add a byte, right? And the hash value completely changes. Now, I'm not saying that hash values are useless. If you have a threat intelligence workflow that's fast enough and you're constantly updating them, you can still get some utility out of them while they're good, right? While a ransomware campaign is going on, you can spot that implant until the hash value rolls over again. But for the most part, this is not going to be a long-lasting indicator of compromise that you can really take advantage of. IP addresses, also pretty easy to change to pivot away from, right? Somebody may run one campaign on AWS, they may run another one on Azure, they may run another one on DigitalOcean, they may run yet another one on DigitalOcean, because that's where they always are. But these IP addresses come and go, they get changed, right? How many people run Suricata in their environment? Anybody? Okay, so as part of the emerging threats rule set that comes by default with Suricata, there's a bunch of rules for suspicious IP addresses. They are always wildly out of date, right? Just because that stuff changes rapidly, right? Which is why it's down here at the bottom of the pyramid. Domain names, fairly simple to pivot away from. God knows there's enough top-level domains these days. I'm old. I've been in IT since the turn of the century, which I like to say to make all the other Gen Xers wince. I remember 5 top-level domains, right? Network or host artifacts, right? Now we're getting into the stuff that's harder for the adversaries to change. If they're always using PSExec to do the lateral movement, or they're always opening named pipes, right? We can write detections around that, and it's much harder for them to change it up, right? If they're changing the name of the executable that they're using, or they're changing its hash value, that's simple. Changing what it actually does, that's harder. We need to remember that these threat actors are like any other IT organization. They have interns, they have documentation, they have processes in place, they have playbooks, right? So the higher we go on this pyramid, the more stuff they need to change, the harder it is for them. Tools, very challenging to change. If you've got your threat actor group and they're all using Sliver, and you write some really good rules around Sliver, and they want to pivot to Cobalt Strike or Mystic or some other framework, it's going to be tough, right? So we're getting up toward the narrow wedge of the pyramid here. And finally, TTPs, tools, tactics, and procedures, right? If we can write rules that spot their actual methodology, independent of the tool, independent of the hash values, independent of the IP address, independent of the domain name, right? If we can write clear, consistent, actionable detections based on the TTPs, then that gives us really good alerting, and it's really hard for the bad guys to change it. Right? So that's what threat intelligence is. Now the question is, how do we leverage it, right? Say we get a report from Huntress or from Verizon, or we even get a spreadsheet of IOCs from our ISAC, right? How do we take that and apply it to our network? How do we see what's going on there and look for matches? All right, so this is where I talk a little bit about Security Onion. So Security Onion is a free and open platform built by defenders for defenders, and that's true. I always say our secret sauce is our entire development team is ex-blue teamers, so we're just building the tools that we really wanted when we were doing this. It includes network visibility, host visibility, intrusion detection, honeypots, log management, and case management, right? So open source project, free to download, free to deploy, bunch of different capabilities. If you haven't used it in a few years, it's really changed a lot. I'd suggest checking it out. What capabilities are we interested in specifically for this detection engineering case? These, right? We're specifically interested in network visibility. We want to see what's on the wire. We're specifically interested in host visibility. We want to see what's happening on our endpoints. We're specifically interested in log management, right? Because these are the sources of operational data that we can use to compare against our threat intelligence and look for bad guys, right? Look for those indicators of compromise, look for those IOCs. How does Security Onion implement these? Well, for network visibility, we have a few different items in the stack. There is a IDS engine. It was Snort back in the day, now it's running on Suricata. What Suricata does, for those who haven't used it before, it's a signature-based IDS. So every network flow that is observed by Security Onion, and I don't want to get into the architectural details, but basically you plug it into a span port or a tap infrastructure on your packet broker, and then it reviews the live network traffic as it sees it on a network port, right? Every network flow is compared against a database of signatures. The signatures can be as broad as any traffic from this address to my internal network, or it could be as specific as, DNS traffic of this length going here. If there's a positive match, then it raises an alert, right? The thing to remember here is what we're observing is real-time network flows. We're not looking at anything after the fact. It's all happening in the moment. We also have metadata generation. So by default, this is done with Zeek. Newer versions of Suricata can also do this. The platform allows you to choose either one, but I'll talk about Zeek because that's the default. That same network data that's being observed that we're reviewing with Suricata, Zeek is generating metadata about it. So for every IP connection on your network, you get a connection record. What IP address, what source port, talk to what destination IP, on what destination port, how much data did they exchange, what flags were set, right? So was it a full connection? Did it end without a fin? Was it just reset? Whatever. You get all that information about the connection itself. It's like NetFlow. If it's a well-known protocol, you also get additional information about that particular protocol. So for example, if a file is downloaded via HTTP, you'll get a connection record. You will also get an HTTP record, right? What was the user agent? What was the HTTP status code? What was the URI that was accessed? You'll also get a file record. What was the MD5 hash of the file? What was the original name of the file? What was the MIME type of the file, et cetera? It will generate all of these logs and put them into an Elasticsearch database on the back end where we can query them and search them and pivot on them, right? It also does file carving. So as it's watching these network flows, certain MIME types of files will be carved out and then reviewed. So PDF files, Microsoft Office files, executables. I think that's it by default. You can set it to any MIME type you like, but we find that in super busy networks, you don't want to carve out all the text files, for example, because a lot of your web traffic is just text/plain, and you end up with a bunch of useless files. For host visibility, we integrate the Elastic Agent. That's an endpoint agent that does log gathering. So on a Windows host, it will get your application logs, your security logs, your system logs. You'll also get logs for things like Sysmon, PowerShell, Defender, right? The stuff that your Windows host is generating by default. And it will also gather telemetry information. So when an endpoint host opens a network connection, makes a DNS query, changes something in the registry, writes a file, reads a file, all of that telemetry is also generated by the Elastic agent and sent into that same backing database. All right? And finally, and that's across Windows, OS 10, and Linux. So whatever operating system you're running on your endpoints. Really wish it worked on Chromebooks. I want to know what my kids' laptops are up to. But it'll pull all of that telemetry data and put it in your central location. And finally, log management. If you have network devices, Palo Alto, Cisco, Fortinet, if you're using cloud services, things like Okta, or if you're using a cloud environment, AWS, Azure, Google Workspaces, we can pull all of that in, normalize that data, and put it in the same place, right? So these are all the raw material on the other side of the ledger, right? We've got our threat intelligence on one side, and then what we need to do is pull in all of this operational information from our environment on the other side and look for matches, right? So what detection languages are available to us to do this? Zeek has a functionality called Zeek Intel. You can give it things like hash values or DNS domain names or IP addresses, and if it sees them, it will raise an alert. Very simple, right? And again, we're playing at the bottom of the pyramid here, but if you can turn these around fast enough, it can still be pretty effective. The Suricata detection language is all, again, network-based. We're talking about matching up signatures to network rules. It can introduce a little bit of overhead if you start doing regexes and stuff that's really complicated, because again, you've got to remember that if you deploy a Suricata rule, it's going to be applied against every single network flow that your sensor sees, right? So it can be done, but sometimes it's a little bit much. We support Yara for evaluating files that are carved out by that file carving process. Yara, for those who haven't used it, you can think of as a very advanced version of strings, right? It looks for structures inside of files. So by default, when Security Onion and Zeek carve out an executable file, it will look at things like, all right, what libraries were imported to this executable, what compiler constructed it, is it digitally signed, right? And it'll look in these, it'll develop this sort of dossier all about the file, and then if there's something suspicious in there, it can raise an alert, right? And finally, Sigma. Sigma is awesome. Has anyone played around with Sigma at all? Okay. All right, so quick, elevator pitch what Sigma is. Sigma is a platform agnostic detection language. Back in the day, when there was a new piece of malware, or there was a new piece of threat actor activity, and we wanted to detect it, what would happen? Well, somebody would write a detection for Splunk, and somebody else would write a detection for ArcSight, and somebody else would write a detection for QRadar, God help them, and somebody else would write a detection for Sentinel, right? All of these different products all had different query languages. They all had different information that they gathered by default. So generating the rules was very much a one-off thing. You'd have a separate rule written for each of these. Sigma, and I should really have the XKCD comic about standards here. Sigma is a new standard that's a platform agnostic language. Basically, you write a YAML version of the detection, and then you compile it for your particular environment. So the same detection rule can be used in QRadar, can be used in Sentinel, can be used in Elasticsearch, can be used in Splunk, right? The syntax is universal across all of these, and then you run it through a Sigma compiler to get a query for your particular environment. What this means is that every log that you are collecting is now a detection opportunity, right? So we were talking before about all those endpoint logs that we're picking up and all those network metadata logs, right? Everything on the wire and everything happening on your endpoints is now a detection opportunity. You can write a Sigma rule to alert on any log that's being collected. It's awesomely powerful. So what does our workflow look like? Well, first you got to choose your indicator, right? What are we looking for? Are we looking for a hash value? Are we looking for a flag in a network packet? Are we looking for a IP address? Are we looking for a particular digital cert that's being used to sign malware, right? Depending on what indicator we're looking for, that's going to drive what data source we use. Often there's more than one choice, right? Sometimes there may even be a couple equivalent choices in terms of efficiency. But we want to very clearly define what we're looking for so that we can figure out what is the most efficient way to find this badness in our environment. Once we've identified the data source, that will tell us what language to use, how we need to model it, and then we can write and test the detection, right? This is, sort of meat and potatoes stuff if you've ever done any kind of purple teaming, right? You simulate an attack, you realize that you did not detect the attack, you write a rule about it, then you simulate it again and hope that your rule works, right? Finally, you can deploy it to your production environment, and then you can monitor and tune, because something always goes wrong eventually, right? All right, so I'm going to get into an example in a moment. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Everything making sense? Everything sounds good? All right. So I'm going to use a workflow example that we actually use in one of our training courses. So this would be an example of the rolling your own threat intel, right? This is something that we use in one of our threat hunting courses. So a recent threat hunt identified data being exfiltrated from a workstation by a malicious process named wombat.exe. Why? Because it's a funny word. This executable had an original file name of dnsexfiltrator.exe and was sourced from GitHub. So you know how when you execute something in Windows and you're monitoring it with sysmon or something like that, you'll get the command name, but you'll also get the original file name, right? So that's what that's talking about. The original file name attribute was dnsexfiltrator. It was written to disk by another executable called avupdate.exe, which was downloaded from a counterfeit website the user was sent to by a phishing email. Wombat.exe was exfiltrating files using encoded DNS subdomains and very long text queries, all for the domain 3scoops.online. Again, because .online domains were free the week that I was making this. We have the email address that sent the phishing email. We have the hash values for avupdate and Wombat. We have the IP addresses for the counterfeit website, for the C2 that was controlling avupdate, and the destination of the DNS requests. So, how do we detect this in the future? Well, the first thing we need to do is take a look at this threat intelligence and figure out what indicator is going to be the best. We've got wombat.exe's information, right? We've got the hash value, we've got the executable name and all that. We've got the original file name, DNS exfiltrator. We've got avupdate. We've got the actual network traffic where it's encoding DNS subdomains. We have the top-level domain and the domain name 3scoops.online. We have email addresses, we have hash values, we have IP addresses, right? So if we look at all of this intelligence in the context of Dave's pyramid of pain, right? We've got our hash values, we've got our IP addresses, we've got our domain names, we've got our network artifacts, we've even got our tools, dnsexfiltrator.exe. So which indicator do you think would be the best for us to build the detection around? You already won. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, TTPs.
TTPs, right. So what would be a good TTP in here?
I want the Wombat executable, change the name from DNS exfiltrator. So if you can tell that they changed the name of executable.
Okay, so if the original file name doesn't match the current file name? Yeah, that might be a good one. Okay. Any other guesses? Yeah.
I would look for the length of the text queries.
Length of the text queries. Okay, why is that?
Because text queries are rare to begin with for normal operations. The fact that they're very long and they're going to, encoded domains, you could look for all of those and have a very tight alert.
All right, very good. So we're at the very top of the pyramid, right? We're talking about the TTPs. We're talking about what the bad guy is actually doing. So let's think about how he would evade our detection, right? We have the hash value for wombat.exe, which is the actual exfiltration tool. We can look for that, but it's not going to be good for very long, because the next time GitHub releases DNS exfiltrator, even if he gives it the same name, right, it'll be recompiled, it'll have a new hash value. If the threat actor decides to compile it himself, and again, it's from GitHub, you know, he can set the original file name to whatever he wants. He can set the new file name to whatever he wants. The IP addresses, those are probably going to change in the next campaign. Those aren't going to do us much good at all. But if we're alerting on the TTPs, even if this threat actor tears the tool down to the ground and rewrites it in, what are the cool kids using now? Rust? Rewrites it in some new language. If he's using the same technique to exfiltrate data, we're still going to catch it, right? And if his tooling on the attacker side, if his receiving server is expecting this encoded DNS as a method of exfiltrating data, we're still going to spot it, right? He can change everything else. He can change the IP addresses, he can change the hash values, he can change the domain name that he's using. But if he's encoding stuff in these long text messages, or these long text queries, and as you said, you know, TXT queries are not super common in most networks, then we're going to be able to spot it, right, if this tool ever shows up again. And that's what we see here, right? These are all good spots where we can spot TTPs, but this is probably the tightest one here. We want to look for very long DNS queries of type TXT, right? This is the sort of network metadata that Zeek pushes out. So now we know what we're looking for. Now we need to identify our data source, right? What are we looking for? We're looking for super long DNS queries. What data source is going to get us that? Well, we can analyze the DNS metadata from Zeek, right? Every DNS query that occurs on the network that is observed by Security Onion, is observed by Zeek, is logged. Those logs include things like what is the DNS query type, what was the query, where was it going, et cetera, right? So if we have a concentrated batch of these very long DNS queries, Zeek is going to spot them. We can look for DNS queries in endpoint telemetry. If we've got the Elastic agent deployed, or if we have some other EDR agent in place, then we can track the DNS queries that are being made by endpoints. And if we see them of a particular length, we can raise an alarm. We can use logs from our internal DNS server, right? Most, especially most small to medium-sized networks, what's the DNS server? It's the domain controller, right? So we can read the DNS logs off of the domain controller, put those into our Elasticsearch database, write some rules around those. Or we could write a custom IDS signature. We can say every time you see a network flow, if it's a DNS network flow and the length is above such and this set of bytes corresponds to a text request, then we can pull from there, right? These are all possible issues or possible points where we can raise this alert. Does anybody have a suggestion for which one of these might be best? All of them? Yes. If we're only doing one or two, right? Anybody? Yeah.
Endpoint telemetry.
Okay, endpoint telemetry would be good. Why do you say that?
You can't hide what's going on at the endpoint.
Fair enough. Yeah, if you're pulling in your endpoint telemetry with Elastic Agent, or if you've got CrowdStrike or Carbon Black, or I don't know, I've been out of the game a couple of years, whatever the cool kids are using for endpoint detection response these days, that might help. Any other ideas?
I think every one of them has their own inherent issue. And depending on how serious this particular thing is, you might want to consider
Layering it,
like an onion.
much like an onion, yes. Everybody likes parfait. All right, so my suggestion, and again, they all have trade-offs, my suggestion would be to go with the DNS metadata from Zeek. And the reason for that is, for one thing, if you look for the DNS queries in endpoint telemetry, who has ever worked in a large enterprise where every endpoint actually had all the agents it was supposed to, and they were all turned on, right? So It's possible that the endpoint that gets compromised is the one that does not have EDR on it, that does not have the endpoint agents that it's supposed to, right? It was part of a virtual desktop infrastructure rollout during COVID that everyone forgot about, and now it's being used as a point for lateral movement, right? So if we're not collecting those logs universally, we may have some blind spots. Logs from the internal DNS server, same thing. What if they're using this exfiltrator tool to directly hit an external DNS server? You're never going to see them on your domain controller. Those logs won't be written, right? Custom Suricata IDS, that would probably work, but again, you're adding a little bit of overhead to your Suricata implementation. If you want the alert to happen instantly, if that's your threat model, then that might be a better way to go. The Sigma rules, if you're writing rules against the DNS metadata in Zeek, those might take a couple minutes to activate, right? Because the DNS query is made, the Zeek subprocess sees it, it writes the log, that's sent into Elasticsearch, then there's a search of your collected logs, and then there's a match. Could be 3-4 minutes before you see an alert. Most environments, probably not a huge deal, but if you're talking about a specific, high security or high vulnerability or a real crown jewel sort of system, you might want to look at the IDS piece. So we figured out we're looking for long DNS text requests. We've identified the data source we're going to use. We're going to look at it in those Zeek DNS logs. How do we write the rule? So I apologize. I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, but this is what the Sigma rule looks like for doing that log query, looking for long DNS requests. As you can see at the top, we have a log source. Tells us what particular logs in our Elasticsearch database we're looking for. In this case, we're looking at Zeek DNS logs, DNS request logs that were recorded by Zeek. And then the detection stanza there in YAML is the details of the detection. So we have 2 items here. First of all, we are looking for a DNS query of type name TXT, right? And then we are also looking for a DNS query length greater than or equal to 200 bytes, right? So what this will do is when we put it into action, it will take this Sigma syntax, it will turn it into an EQL query, an Elastic Query Language query, and then that query will be run against our collected Zeek DNS logs every 3 minutes, right? And if there's a match, it will raise an alert. This is not specific to Security Onion. As I said, Sigma is platform agnostic. If you wanted to build this detection in Splunk, if you wanted to build this detection in QRadar, if you wanted to build this detection in Sentinel, it's the same syntax. You just run it through a different compiler because you're dealing with a different query language, right? That part of our brains that we used to use for phone numbers, I'm pretty sure it's all just different vendor query languages now, but this makes it a little bit simpler. Then we can deploy it to production. We can take this, we can put it in our production instance, whatever is collecting these Zeek logs for us. It will start analyzing them, and it will start alerting on long text issues. And finally, we monitor the rule and we can tune it. It's entirely possible that there's some janky piece of hardware on your network that everybody forgot about that's supposed to be controlling the HVAC and is making giant text queries, and nobody noticed until you wrote this rule, right? Or it might just be compromised. But, enterprise environments are really weird. There's always strange stuff going on. So after you deploy this, you're probably going to have to start tuning, looking for false positives, maybe saying ignore this IP address, ignore this destination address, put in a thresholding rule so it only happens if you see 3 or 4 of these in the course of a minute, right? There's ways to tune it to make it more effective. All right. So, conclusion. Threat intelligence is gold when it comes to understanding what adversaries are actually doing, what threat actors are going to do. So if we take that threat intelligence, whether we roll it ourselves, or we get it from our ISAC, or we get it from Verizon or Huntress or one of these other companies that we've all been talking about today, we can take that, we can filter it via the pyramid of pain to determine what indicators are the most useful to us, what are going to give us the fewest false positives, what are going to have the most longevity, right? We want to look at TTPs, we want to look at actual tooling, we want to avoid using things that are easy for the actor to change, like hash values and IP addresses. And then we can take those indicators and build detection rules using free tools so that if any of this stuff shows up in our network, we're aware of it. Okay? I have a couple minutes left for questions. If you want, there's my Blue Sky account. You can follow me. If you have a question, you can always send me an email. And I'll post these slides on my GitHub. I think they're also on the schedule site for the conference. If anybody wants some Security Onion swag, I've got some stickers and stuff down here. Feel free to help yourself. Otherwise, I believe I have a few minutes left for questions. Anybody? I was that thorough? Yeah, what's up?
What also, I guess, online communities or like forums where you recommend someone who wants to do detection engineering kind of stall out into maybe get like ideas? I know you mentioned like Bible and stuff. Are there any kind of additional, how much security has like a forum or anything, like a community kind of?
We do. So we have a discussion forum, but it's more engineering focused than detection focused. It's more, people who are having implementation issues. The stuff like the SANS Internet Storm Center is really good. That's a good source of up-to-the-minute IOCs and stuff. In terms of this process, I know that some of their summits have touched on detection engineering stuff. I can't think of any sites offhand specifically around this, though.
You could look at SOC Prime.
SOC Prime?
Yeah, if you haven't heard that one, but to some extent, you can get a few things without paying, and it is all Sigma language rules that you can apply to your own environment. And it's a good place to go and look at what other people have written.
Oh, and one other thing I want to mention, I didn't have time to put it in the slides for this week, but we also released another really cool thing this week that's going to be in our next release, which is incident response playbooks that are joined to rules. So you can write a detection rule, and then when the alert fires, there will be step-by-step instructions for the analyst, including contextual information pulled out of the logs. So like, oh, this malware fired. What other hosts has it touched in the last 15 minutes? What other alerts fired for this host in the last 24 hours, et cetera, and it builds it all out for you. Really, really cool. There's a video on it on the Security Onion YouTube channel if you want to check it out, and that should be out in the next couple of weeks in our next release. Yeah?
Is the Windows, the agent wasn't-based or the Elastic agent?
In version 2.4, we use the Elastic agent. So in 2.3, we had 3 separate agents. We had Waza, OS Query, and then FileBeat, or WinLogBeat if you're on a Windows endpoint. Now that's all been combined into the Elastic agent. The really nice thing about that is the Elastic agent is actually centrally configured. So once your agent checks in with the Security Onion server, you can do things like alter its configuration, tell it, no, I want to watch this log file, not this log file. That's all done through the web interface, rather than banging out YAML files on the endpoint anymore, which makes it a lot easier for people either in a large enterprise where they can't get their hands on the endpoint, or people who just aren't as comfortable with doing that kind of manual configuration. All right. Anything else, or are we all ready for lunch? Lunch, excellent. All right, thank you for your time. Thanks.